At my grandmother's funeral, a stranger grabbed me and said, "She never stopped looking for you." The old woman's fingers dug into my arm like claws, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who looked like she might blow away in the October wind. I tried to step back from the graveside, but she held on, her watery blue eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my stomach drop. "She never stopped looking for you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Every single day for 26 years, Sarah. Every damn day." I froze. The handful of other mourners continued shuffling away from the freshly filled grave, their black umbrellas bobbing as they headed back to their cars. My parents were already halfway to the parking lot, probably annoyed I wasn't keeping up. But this stranger, this tiny woman in a threadbare coat, knew my name. "I'm sorry, I think you have me confused with someone else," I said, gently trying to extract my arm. "I don't know who you're talking about." Her laugh was bitter, almost harsh. "Don't know who I'm talking about? Child, you're the spitting image of Eleanor when she was your age. Same green eyes, same stubborn chin. I've been staring at your picture on her mantle for decades." Eleanor. The name hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor had been my grandmother, my father's mother, but she died when I was 2. At least, that's what I'd been told my entire 28 years of life. The few times I'd asked about her, Dad would get that pinched look around his eyes and say she'd abandoned the family and wasn't worth discussing. "Eleanor's been dead for years," I said slowly. "Since I was little." The woman's face crumpled. "Dead? Dead? We just buried her not 10 minutes ago. She died Tuesday night at Mercy General, been sick for months. Cancer." She gestured wildly at the grave behind us, where a modest headstone read, "Eleanor Margaret Hartwell, 1932 to 2024, beloved friend." My vision blurred at the edges. This had to be some kind of sick joke. "That's impossible. My grandmother died when I was 2 years old. My parents told me." "Your parents?" The woman spat. "Richard and Linda. Those 2 vultures haven't spoken to Eleanor since 1998. Cut her off completely after that nasty business with your grandfather's will. Broke her heart." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "She hired 3 different private investigators over the years, trying to find you. Spent her savings on it. All she wanted was to know her granddaughter." I felt like I was drowning. "No, that's not, they would have told me if she was alive." "They wouldn't have." But even as I said it, I knew they would have. My parents were capable of exactly that kind of cruelty, that kind of calculated deception. How many times had I begged to know about my extended family? How many nights had I cried myself to sleep as a child, convinced I was fundamentally unlovable because even my own grandmother had abandoned me? "What's your name?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Ruth Morrison. I lived next door to Eleanor for 37 years. She talked about you every day, showed me every school picture she managed to get her hands on, don't ask me how. Had a whole room dedicated to you. Gifts for every birthday, every Christmas, wrapped and waiting." The cemetery spun around me. In the distance, I could see my parents standing by their car, Dad checking his watch with obvious irritation. They had stolen 26 years from me. 26 years of love I never knew existed. "Ruth," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "I need to know everything. Please." She glanced toward the parking lot where my parents waited, then back at me with something fierce in her expression. "Not here. They'll see us talking." She fumbled in her purse and pressed a crumpled business card into my hand. This was Eleanor's lawyer. "Call him tomorrow, his name's Marcus Webb." She left instructions, in case this day ever came. Instructions. She never gave up hope you'd find out the truth someday. Made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd find you and tell you everything. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "I should have done it sooner. Should have tracked you down myself years ago, but Eleanor kept saying she didn't want to cause trouble in your life. She thought maybe your parents had good reasons." My phone buzzed. A text from Dad, "Sarah, come on. We have dinner reservations at 6, Dinner reservations. We just buried a woman who'd spent nearly 3 decades searching for me, and my father was worried about dinner reservations." "The room you mentioned," I said quickly. "The gifts. Is it still?" "Everything's still there. She made me executor of her estate 6 months ago when the diagnosis got worse. The house at 1247, Maple Street, that's where she lived. Where she waited." Ruth grabbed my hand with both of hers. "Sarah, she left you a letter. Actually, she left you dozens of letters. One for every birthday she missed, every Christmas, every milestone she wasn't allowed to witness." The ground felt unsteady beneath my feet. "How much do you know about what happened with the will?" Ruth's expression darkened. "I know your grandfather left the hardware store to Eleanor, not to Richard. Worth about $400,000 when he sold it in '99. I know Richard felt entitled to that money, and when his mother wouldn't just hand it over, he told her she'd never see you again." She paused, studying my face. "I also know Eleanor never spent a penny of it on herself. Lived in the same tiny house, drove the same beat-up Honda for 20 years. She was saving it all for you." My breath caught. "Saving what?" "The store money, plus everything she scrimped and saved. Plus the life insurance." Ruth lowered her voice. "Near as I can figure, you're looking at close to $600,000, child. Maybe more." I stared at her. $600,000. My parents had stolen not just my grandmother's love, but a fortune that could have changed my life. While I'd struggled through college working 3 jobs, while I'd lived in studio apartments and eaten ramen for dinner, while I'd wondered why I wasn't worth loving, my grandmother had been building a legacy for me. "Sarah." My father's voice carried across the cemetery, sharp with irritation. "Let's go." "I have to," I started. "Go," Ruth said firmly. "But call that lawyer tomorrow." "And Sarah?" She squeezed my hand one more time. She kept a photo of you as a 2-year-old on her nightstand. Kissed it goodnight every evening for 26 years. You were loved, child. So deeply loved. I walked back toward my parents on unsteady legs, the lawyer's card burning in my palm like evidence of the most devastating betrayal imaginable. Dad was already starting the car when I got in. What did that old woman want? I looked at him in the rearview mirror, really looked at him. She said she was sorry for my loss. He grunted. Waste of time. We barely knew the woman. The lie came so easily to him. So naturally. I said nothing, but inside, something cold and determined was taking root. The ride home was 43 minutes of torture. I sat in the back seat, Ruth's revelations echoing in my skull while my parents discussed whether to stop for gas or wait until morning. Normal, mundane conversation while my entire world had just imploded. That was a nice service, Mom said, adjusting her visor. Simple, but nice. Waste of money if you ask me, Dad replied. Who spends $3,000 on a funeral when there's barely anyone there to see it? $3,000. He knew exactly what Eleanor's funeral cost. Which meant he'd been involved somehow, or at least informed about the arrangements. My grip tightened on Ruth's card. How did you find out she died? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Dad's eyes flicked to mine in the rearview mirror. What do you mean? I mean, if you hadn't spoken to her in years, how did you know about the funeral? A pause that lasted too long. Her lawyer contacted us. Legal obligation, since we're next of kin. Another lie, but this one gave me information. If the lawyer had contacted them, that meant Marcus Webb, the man whose card was currently cutting into my palm, had been trying to reach out. Which meant my parents had actively chosen to keep Eleanor's death from me. Why didn't you tell me she was alive? I asked quietly. The car swerved slightly. Mom turned around, her face pale. What kind of question is that, Sarah? We told you she died when you were little. But she didn't, did she? The silence stretched for miles. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. I don't know what that old busybody told you, but Eleanor made her choices a long time ago. She chose money over family. What money? It doesn't matter now, Mom said quickly. She's gone, and dwelling on old family drama won't bring anyone peace. But I could see Dad's knuckles white on the steering wheel, could feel the tension radiating from both of them. They were scared. Good. When we finally reached my apartment, I declined their invitation to dinner with a fake headache. The moment their car disappeared around the corner, I was dialing Marcus Webb's office number. Webb and Associates, this is Janet. Hi, I need to speak with Marcus Webb. It's about Eleanor Hartwell. This is her granddaughter, Sarah. A sharp intake of breath. Oh my goodness. Sarah, yes, Mr. Webb has been hoping you'd call. He's actually here late tonight, working on Mrs. Hartwell's estate. Hold on. The hold music seemed to last forever. Then, Sarah. This is Marcus Webb. I am so very sorry for your loss, and I'm so glad you called. Mr. Webb, I need to know what happened. All of it. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Say, 9 o'clock. There are documents you need to see, and frankly, this conversation is better had in person. Just tell me one thing. Is it true that she left me money? A long pause. Sarah, your grandmother left you everything. The house, her savings, her life insurance policy. As of today, you're worth approximately $643,000. I sank onto my couch, the number hitting me like a physical blow. And my parents knew. They've known since 2018, when Eleanor first drafted her will naming you as sole beneficiary. I sent them copies as a courtesy, hoping it might encourage reconciliation. 2018, 6 years ago. 6 years of struggling with student loans, of choosing between groceries and rent, of feeling unwanted and unloved. 6 years of Christmas dinners where my parents watched me carefully budget for modest gifts, never once mentioning that my grandmother had left me a fortune. Mr. Webb, I need copies of everything. Every document, every communication you had with my parents, every piece of evidence that proves what they did. I'll have everything ready for you tomorrow. Sarah, there's something else. Your grandmother, she documented everything. Every attempt to contact you, every private investigator report, every letter she wrote. She suspected your parents might try to contest the will after her death, so she built an extensive paper trail. My chest felt tight. What kind of paper trail? Enough to prove that they deliberately kept you from her, that they knew about her attempts to reach you, and that they actively prevented any relationship between you two. If you decide to pursue legal action for what they've stolen from you, both financially and emotionally, you'd have a very strong case. I thought about Dad's casual lies in a car, about 26 years of feeling abandoned, about all the nights I'd wondered what was wrong with me that even my own grandmother couldn't love me. I'll see you at 9 tomorrow, Mr. Webb. Sarah. Your grandmother would be so proud of you. She never stopped believing this day would come. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to process the magnitude of my parents' betrayal. They hadn't just lied to me, they'd systematically destroyed any chance I had of knowing the one person who'd loved me unconditionally. But now I knew the truth. And I was going to make sure everyone else did too. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with Ruth's business card and a notepad, writing down every lie I could remember. Every time I'd asked about grandparents and been told they were all gone. Every Christmas when I'd watched other kids talk about visiting family while I believed I had none who cared. Every therapy session where I tried to understand why I felt so fundamentally unwanted. By 3 a.m., I had 4 pages of incidents. By sunrise, I was researching Eleanor Margaret Hartwell online. She existed everywhere I looked. Obituaries from the local paper describing her as a beloved member of the community who volunteered at the animal shelter for 15 years. A 2019 article about her donating school supplies to underprivileged children. Photos from various charity events, always in the same threadbare coat I'd seen Ruth wearing, because she'd probably given Eleanor's good clothes away rather than throw them out. In one photo from 2021, Eleanor was handing a check to the children's hospital. The caption read, "Local resident Eleanor Hartwell continues her annual donation tradition, contributing $5,000 to the pediatric wing in memory of her late husband Robert." She looked frail but determined, her white hair carefully styled, wearing a dress I recognized as something from the 1990s. She'd been giving away thousands while living in poverty, and I had a sinking suspicion I knew why. At 8:30 a.m., I was sitting in Marcus Webb's waiting room, clutching a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The receptionist, Janet, who'd answered the phone, kept glancing at me with poorly concealed curiosity. "She talked about you constantly," Janet finally said. "Mrs. Hartwell. Every time she came in to update her will or discuss the estate, she'd ask if we'd heard anything from your parents." She kept hoping. "How often did she update the will?" "Every few years. Always adding more for you as her savings grew. The last time was 8 months ago, when the cancer diagnosis came. She wanted to make sure the medical bills wouldn't touch your inheritance." My throat constricted. Medical bills? She refused to let the hospital put a lien on the house. Paid everything out of pocket rather than risk the estate being reduced. Said the house belonged to you now, had always belonged to you. Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway, a tall man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Sarah. Come in, please." His office was lined with law books and family photos. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, where several thick folders waited. "Before we begin," he said, settling behind his desk, "I want you to know that your grandmother was one of the most determined people I've ever met. What she did for you, the sacrifices she made, it's extraordinary." He opened the first folder. "This is the correspondence file. Every letter I sent to your parents, every certified mail receipt, every attempt at contact." He spread the papers across his desk. "The first letter went out in 1999, informing your father that Eleanor wanted to establish a relationship with you. His response was unequivocal. He handed me a single sheet of law firm letterhead dated March 15, 1999. Asterisk Mr. Webb, my wife and I have made the decision that Eleanor will have no contact with our daughter. This decision is final and non-negotiable. Any further attempts at contact will be considered harassment. Richard Hartwell asterisk." That was it, Marcus said. No explanation, no room for discussion. But Eleanor didn't give up. He opened another folder. Private investigator reports. She hired different firms over the years, trying to find out where you lived, where you went to school, how you were doing. Look at this one from 2015. The report was thorough and heartbreaking. My college address, my major, my part-time jobs. A photo of me walking across campus, looking tired and stressed. Notes about my apparent financial struggles, and no evidence of family support. She saw this, Marcus said quietly, and immediately tried to contact your parents again. She wanted to help with your college expenses. What did they say? His expression darkened. Your father threatened to get a restraining order. Said if Eleanor ever tried to contact you directly, he'd make sure she faced legal consequences for stalking. The room felt cold. So she never tried to reach me herself. She was terrified of making your life worse. She thought maybe your parents had convinced you she was dangerous or unstable. She didn't want to cause you trauma by appearing unexpectedly. I stared at the investigator's photo of my 21-year-old self, looking overwhelmed and alone. All that time, someone who loved me had been watching from a distance, wanting to help but afraid to reach out. There's more, Marcus said gently. But first, you should know that your inheritance is even larger than I mentioned yesterday. After the final accounting, including the house appraisal and life insurance, you're looking at just over $700,000. $700,000. While I'd been working multiple jobs and eating generic cereal for dinner. Mr. Webb, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, I want copies of everything. Every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. And then I want to know exactly what legal options I have against my parents. He nodded slowly. Sarah, what they did to you, and to Eleanor, it's not just morally reprehensible. Parts of it might actually be criminal. Criminal. The word came out as a whisper. Marcus pulled out another folder, this one marked with red tabs. Identity theft, mail fraud, interference with inheritance rights. Your father used your social security number to redirect several official communications from Eleanor's estate to his address. When Eleanor tried to send you birthday cards and letters through certified mail over the years, someone was intercepting them. He showed me a stack of postal receipts. Look at these addresses. 847, Pine Street, Apartment 3B, that was your college address in 2016. 1205, Oak Avenue, Unit 12, your apartment from 2018 to 2020. Eleanor had been sending you letters for years, Sarah. Letters that were delivered and signed for. My hands trembled as I looked at the signatures on the delivery confirmations. Art Hartwell, in my father's unmistakable handwriting, over and over again. He'd been intercepting my mail for nearly a decade. How is that legal? It's not. Mail theft is a federal crime. Your father somehow gained access to your mail at multiple addresses, possibly by claiming to be helping you or saying he was picking up packages. But Sarah, that's not the worst part. Marcus opened his laptop and turned it toward me. This is Eleanor's bank account from 2020. Look at this transaction. The screen showed a withdrawal for $15,000 on March 18, 2020, with a memo that read, Emergency Assistance, Sarah. I stared at the date. March 2020. Right when I'd been laid off due to the pandemic, when I'd been struggling to pay rent and had been surviving on unemployment benefits and savings. She sent me money. She tried to. The check was made out to you and mailed to your apartment on Oak Avenue. But look at this. He pulled out a photocopy of a canceled check. The endorsement signature on the back wasn't mine, it was my father's name, forged in what was clearly an attempt to mimic my handwriting. The room spun. He stole $15,000 from me. That's just the one we can prove. Eleanor sent smaller amounts over the years, $500 for your birthday in 2019, $1,000 for what she thought was your graduation. Every check was endorsed and cashed, but never by you. I thought about March 2020, when I'd called my parents crying about potentially losing my apartment. Dad had listened with what I thought was sympathy, then said I needed to figure it out on my own, because tough times build character. All while my grandmother's money meant to help me, was sitting in his account. Mr. Webb, I need you to calculate exactly how much they stole. Every penny. He was already pulling out a calculator. Based on Eleanor's records, between 1999 and 2024, she attempted to send you approximately $47,000 in various gifts and emergency funds. That doesn't include the emotional damages, the lost relationship, or the inheritance they tried to hide from you. $47,000. I closed my eyes and thought about all the nights I'd cried over money, all the times I'd felt like a burden for needing help, all the therapy sessions where I'd wondered why my own family didn't care if I struggled. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. Eleanor documented every conversation she had with your parents. She recorded phone calls. My eyes snapped open. Recorded them. Indiana is a one-party consent state. She was legally allowed to record conversations she was part of. And Sarah, some of these recordings are damning. He pulled out an old cassette recorder, the kind Eleanor's generation would have used. This is from December 2019. Eleanor called to ask if she could send you a Christmas gift. He pressed play. The sound quality was poor, but I could clearly hear my father's voice. Eleanor, I've told you 1,000 times. Sarah doesn't want anything to do with you. She's an adult now, and she's made her choice. Then Eleanor's voice, friendlier but determined, but Richard, if I could just talk to her myself. No. Absolutely not. She thinks you're dead, and it's better that way. You made your bed when you chose money over family. I never chose money over family. I tried to give you what you wanted from Robert's estate, but you demanded everything, including the house. And when you said no, you chose your precious inheritance over your granddaughter. So live with that choice, Eleanor. But don't drag Sarah into it. The recording cut off. I sat in stunned silence, processing what I'd just heard. She thinks you're dead, my father had said. Present tense. In 2019. 5 years after they'd supposedly told me she died. They'd been maintaining their lie for decades, actively reinforcing it every time Eleanor tried to reach out. How many recordings are there? Marcus's expression was grim. 17 conversations spanning from 2003 to 2023. In every single one, your parents lied about your feelings toward Eleanor and blocked her attempts at contact. I stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, people were living normal Tuesday mornings, grabbing coffee and heading to work, completely unaware that my entire life had been built on lies. There's one more thing, Marcus said, and something in his voice made me turn back from the window. The recordings from the last few months, when Eleanor was dying, they're particularly difficult to listen to. He held up another cassette, dated just 3 months ago. She was in hospice care, and she made one final attempt to reach you. She called your father directly. My stomach clenched. Play it. The recording crackled to life, and immediately I could hear the difference in Eleanor's voice, weaker, labored, but still fighting. Richard, please. I'm dying. The doctors say I have maybe 2 months. I'm begging you, let me see Sarah just once. Let me explain what really happened. My father's voice was cold, irritated. Eleanor, we've been through this. I know about the checks, Richard. Silence on the recording. Then, what checks? The ones you've been cashing. The birthday money, the Christmas gifts, the emergency fund I sent when she lost her job. I know it was you. I don't know what you're talking about. My bank has copies of everything. Forged signatures, mail theft, that's federal crime, Richard. But I don't care about any of that. I just want to see my granddaughter before I die. A long pause, then my father's voice turned vicious in a way I'd rarely heard. You want to see her? Fine. You want to tell her how you chose money over family? Go ahead. But when she learns the truth about what kind of person you really are, don't come crying to me. What are you talking about? Sarah knows you abandoned us. She knows you picked your inheritance over your own son and granddaughter. She spent her whole life dealing with abandonment issues because of what you did. So sure, Eleanor, show up and destroy what's left of her mental health. Prove to her that the grandmother she mourned really was the selfish bitch I said you were. The sound that came through the recording next was heartbreaking, Eleanor crying, gasping sobs that spoke of complete defeat. I never abandoned anyone. You know that's not what happened. Doesn't matter what I know. It's what Sarah believes. And if you contact her now, if you destroy the life she's built by proving her parents are liars, what do you think that's going to do to her? You want to traumatize your granddaughter just to ease your own conscience. The recording ended with Eleanor hanging up. Marcus turned off the player and looked at me with something like fury in his eyes. That was July 15th. Eleanor died August 23rd, still believing that contacting you would somehow damage your mental health. I felt hollow, scooped out. He used my therapy against her. What do you mean? I've been in counseling for years, dealing with feeling unwanted. Abandoned. My parents knew about every session, every breakthrough, every time I talked about wondering why my grandmother didn't love me enough to stay in my life. I sank back into the chair. And Dad weaponized all of that to keep her away. Marcus nodded grimly. He convinced a dying woman that reaching out to her beloved granddaughter would be an act of cruelty. I thought about Eleanor, alone in hospice, believing that loving me meant staying away. Believing that her presence in my life would only cause me pain. Mr. Webb, I need you to prepare everything. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. I'm done protecting them. What are you planning to do? I looked at him steadily. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what Richard and Linda Hartwell are capable of. Starting with the rest of the family. He leaned forward. Sarah, before you do anything public, you should know, we can pursue criminal charges. Mail theft, identity theft, elder abuse. This isn't just a family matter anymore. How long would that take? Months, maybe years. But Sarah. He paused, studying my face. There's something else. Something I haven't told you yet. My heart sank. What now? Eleanor's house, your house now. Your father has been trying to claim it. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean, claim it? Marcus pulled out yet another folder. 3 days after Eleanor died, before the funeral was even planned, your father contacted the probate court. He filed a motion claiming that as Eleanor's only surviving child, he should inherit the estate. He's arguing that you were never legally acknowledged as a beneficiary. But you said there was a will. There is. A very clear, very legal will. But your father is claiming Eleanor was mentally incompetent when she wrote it, and that any gifts to you should be invalid because you're... Marcus hesitated. Because I'm what? Because according to his filing, you've been estranged from the family due to your own choice to reject your grandmother, and therefore shouldn't be considered a legitimate heir. I stared at him. He's using his own lies as legal justification to steal my inheritance. That's exactly what he's doing. And Sarah, if he succeeds, if he can convince a judge that Eleanor was incompetent or that you truly didn't want a relationship with her, he could potentially overturn the entire will. The room felt like it was closing in. How is that possible? Contested wills are complicated, especially when there's a claim of mental incompetence. Your father has hired a lawyer, a good one. They're going to argue that Eleanor's obsession with finding you was evidence of dementia, and that her savings and gift-giving were signs of financial irresponsibility. I thought about the investigator reports, the intercepted mail, the years of blocked contact. But we have proof that he prevented her from reaching me. We do. But Sarah, this is going to be a fight. A very public, very ugly fight. And your parents are going to drag every aspect of your relationship with them into court. I stood up again, but this time it wasn't anxiety driving me, it was pure, cold determination. Let them try, I said. Let them explain to a judge why they've been cashing checks made out to me. Let them explain the forged signatures and the intercepted mail. Let them explain 17 recordings of them lying to a dying woman. Marcus smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Now that sounds like Eleanor's granddaughter. Over the next 3 days, I became a detective investigating my own life. Marcus had given me copies of everything, every document, every recording, every piece of evidence that proved my parents' decades-long deception. I spread it all across my dining room table like a war room, cross-referencing dates and building a timeline of lies. The pattern was worse than I'd imagined. In 2008, when I graduated high school, Eleanor had sent a $2,000 check for college expenses. The bank records showed it was deposited into an account with my name on it, an account I'd never opened. When I called the bank, they confirmed that Richard Hartwell was listed as a cosigner and had been the only person to ever access the funds. In 2013, she'd sent $500 for my birthday with a note I'd never seen. Dearest Sarah, I hope your new apartment brings you happiness. I think about you every day and pray you're well. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. Dad had cashed that check 3 days after it was mailed. The cruelest discovery came from 2017. Eleanor had sent $3,000 with a letter explaining she'd heard through mutual friends that I was struggling after a layoff. The letter was heartbreaking. I know you don't know me, sweetheart, but I'm your father's mother, and I love you so much. I hope this helps until you get back on your feet. You don't have to pay it back or even acknowledge it, I just want you to be okay. I remembered that layoff. I'd been unemployed for 4 months, living on credit cards and food from the dollar store. I'd called my parents crying, begging for a small loan to cover rent. Mom had said they were tight on money too, and suggested I move back home if I couldn't handle adult responsibilities. All while they sat on $3,000 that was meant for me. But the financial theft was only part of it. The recordings Marcus had given me revealed something even more sinister. My parents hadn't just been passive gatekeepers. They'd been actively poisoning Eleanor against me. In a 2014 recording, I heard my father tell Eleanor, "She's angry, Mom. Sarah blames you for abandoning the family. She said she never wants to hear your name again." In 2016, Sarah's therapist says contact from you would be detrimental to her healing process. You need to respect that. In 2020, she got married last year, Mom. Didn't invite any family. She's moved on from all of us. I'd never got married. I barely dated anyone seriously in 2020. But Eleanor's voice on the recording was devastated. She got married. My granddaughter got married and I missed it. They'd created an entire fictional version of my life where I was thriving, happy, and completely uninterested in my grandmother. Meanwhile, I'd been struggling financially and emotionally, convinced I was fundamentally unlovable because even my own family had rejected me. On Thursday evening, my phone rang. Dad's number. "Sarah, we need to talk. Can you come over for dinner Sunday?" His voice had an edge I'd never heard before, something between nervous and threatening. I thought about the probate filing Marcus had mentioned, about Dad's attempt to steal Eleanor's house. What's this about, Dad? There are some legal matters we need to discuss. Regarding Eleanor's estate. So he knew I'd been to see Marcus. Either the lawyer had contacted him, or Dad had been monitoring the probate case more closely than he'd let on. Legal matters. Sarah, Eleanor left some assets. There might be complications with how they're distributed. We want to make sure you understand the situation before you make any decisions you might regret. The threat was subtle but clear. Don't cause trouble, or you'll regret it. I'll be there Sunday, I said. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. And Sarah? Maybe don't discuss Eleanor's estate with anyone else until we've had a chance to talk. There are family privacy issues to consider. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone. They were scared. Good. I called Marcus immediately. They want to meet with me Sunday. I think they know I've been to see you. Sarah, be very careful. If they're feeling cornered, they might try to manipulate you into signing something. Don't agree to anything, don't sign anything, and if possible, record the conversation. Is that legal? Indiana is a one-party consent state, remember? Eleanor taught us that. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Sunday dinner at my parents' house had always been a careful dance of small talk and unspoken tensions, but walking up their driveway that evening felt like approaching a battlefield. I had my phone in my pocket, recording app ready, and a USB drive with copies of everything Marcus had given me hidden in my car. Mom answered the door with her usual forced smile, but I could see the strain around her eyes. "Sarah, honey, come in. Dinner's almost ready." The house smelled like pot roast and fear. Dad was waiting in the living room, still in his church clothes despite it being nearly 6 p.m. On the coffee table sat a manila folder and what looked like legal documents. "Sit down, sweetheart," Dad said, gesturing to the couch. His tone was artificially gentle, the way you'd talk to someone you were trying not to spook. "We need to discuss Eleanor's situation." I perched on the edge of the cushion, every muscle tense. "What situation?" Mom sat beside Dad, their unity suddenly obvious in a way it had never been before. They'd clearly rehearsed this. "Eleanor left some money," Mom began carefully. "Quite a bit, actually. But there are complications with her mental state toward the end. Dementia, you understand. The courts might not recognize her final wishes as legally valid." I kept my expression neutral. "How much money?" Dad leaned forward. "Sarah, that's not what's important here. What's important is that Eleanor wasn't thinking clearly when she made certain decisions about her estate. She was confused about family relationships, living in the past." "What kind of confusion?" "She thought." Mom paused, glancing at Dad. "She thought she had a relationship with you. The dementia made her believe you two were in contact, that she'd been part of your life all these years." The lie was so brazen I almost laughed. "Really? Really," Dad said firmly. "It's actually quite sad. In her final months, she was telling people she'd raised you, that you visited her regularly. Complete fabrications." I hit record on my phone. "So when did the dementia start?" "Oh, years ago," Mom said quickly. "At least since 2018, maybe earlier. She'd call sometimes, completely confused about where you were, why you weren't visiting. We tried to gently remind her that you were living your own life, but she couldn't accept it." Dad nodded solemnly. "The doctor said it's common for dementia patients to create elaborate fantasies about estranged family members. She convinced herself she'd been trying to contact you, even imagined sending you money." My blood pressure spiked. "Imagine sending money." "Delusions," Dad said. "She'd write checks to people who didn't exist, mail letters to old addresses. We tried to manage her finances toward the end, but she was very secretive about her accounts." I stared at them. They were setting up their legal defense in real time, creating a narrative where Eleanor was mentally incompetent and any evidence of their interference could be dismissed as the confused ramblings of a sick woman. "The thing is, Sarah," Dad continued, pulling out the documents from the folder, "Eleanor's will names you as beneficiary for a substantial amount of money. Nearly $700,000. He said it like he was doing me a favor by telling me. But given her mental state, and the fact that you haven't had contact with her since childhood, it would be inappropriate for you to accept that inheritance." Mom nodded earnestly. "It wouldn't be right, honey. That money was meant for family who actually knew Eleanor, who took care of her." "Family like you?" I asked. "We visited her," Dad said smoothly. "Especially in her final years. We made sure she had what she needed, even though it was difficult given her condition." Another lie. The neighbor Ruth had told me my parents hadn't been to Eleanor's house in decades. "So what are you suggesting?" I asked. Dad slid a document across the coffee table. "We're suggesting you disclaim the inheritance. Sign this, and Eleanor's estate will pass to her next of kin, me, and I can make sure the money goes where Eleanor would have really wanted it. Charity, maybe a scholarship fund in her name." I picked up the document. It was a formal disclaimer of inheritance, already filled out with my name. All it needed was my signature. "This seems very convenient," I said. "Having this ready before you even told me about the money." "We wanted to make the process as simple as possible," Mom said. "Given the circumstances, it seemed like the right thing to do." I set the document back on the table. "And if I don't sign this?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Sarah," Dad said, his voice losing its artificial warmth, "contesting a will is expensive and emotionally draining. Especially when the deceased was mentally incompetent. You'd be dragging Eleanor's memory through court, exposing her illness to public scrutiny. Is that really what you want? Plus," Mom added, "there would be questions about why you never visited her, why you never tried to have a relationship. That might be uncomfortable for you. The threat was clear: sign this paper, or we'll destroy your reputation in court." I stood up slowly. "I need to think about this." "Of course," Dad said, but his smile was sharp. "Just remember, Sarah, family disputes have a way of getting very ugly very quickly. Secrets come out. Old wounds get reopened. Sometimes it's better to just let sleeping dogs lie." As I walked to my car, I realized they'd just confessed to everything. The recording in my pocket captured them admitting Eleanor left me money, claiming she was incompetent, and threatening to make my life difficult if I didn't cooperate. They'd also revealed something crucial: they were scared enough of what I might know to try buying my silence with manipulation and threats. Which meant they had no idea about the recordings, the intercepted mail, or the forged checks. They thought I was still the same lost, abandoned granddaughter who'd spent her life believing nobody wanted her. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Monday morning, I was back in Marcus Webb's office before 9 a.m., playing the recording of Sunday's dinner conversation. His expression grew darker with each lie my parents told. "They're building a dementia defense," he said when it finished. "Classic elder abuse cover-up. Claim the victim was incompetent, discredit any evidence of their lucid decisions. But we have recordings going back 20 years. Eleanor was clearly coherent in all of them." "Exactly. And Sarah, they made a crucial mistake." Marcus rewound the recording to my father's voice. "We tried to manage her finances toward the end, but she was very secretive about her accounts. He just admitted to accessing Eleanor's financial information without her consent. Combined with the forged checks and intercepted mail, that's felony elder abuse." I felt a cold satisfaction. "What's our next move?" "We file a formal response to their probate challenge, including all evidence of fraud and manipulation." "But Sarah, there's something else." Marcus pulled out a thick envelope. "This arrived by courier this morning. From your father's attorney. Inside was a settlement offer. They were proposing I accept $50,000 from Eleanor's estate, a generous gesture given the complicated circumstances, in exchange for dropping any claims and signing a non-disclosure agreement. $50,000 out of $700,000. And a promise to never speak about what they'd done. They're panicking, I said. Completely. A settlement offer this early means they know their legal position is weak. Sarah, they're offering you hush money. I thought about Eleanor, alone in hospice, convinced that reaching out to me would cause me trauma. About all the birthdays and Christmases she'd spent hoping I might somehow know she loved me. Reject the offer. And Marcus? I want to file a police report about the mail theft and check fraud. Today. His eyebrows rose. Are you sure? Once we involve law enforcement, this becomes criminal. There's no taking it back. They had 26 years to tell me the truth. They chose to double down and try to steal my inheritance instead. Marcus nodded approvingly. I'll call Detective Morrison at the fraud division. But first, there's someone else you need to meet. An hour later, I was sitting across from Patricia Chen, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial elder abuse cases. She'd already been reviewing Eleanor's bank records. Your grandmother was methodical, Patricia said, spreading out financial statements. She documented every transaction, kept copies of every check, maintained detailed records of all her attempts to help you. She pointed to a pattern of withdrawals. Look at this. Every few months, Eleanor would withdraw cash, always small amounts, always from different branches. I think she was trying to build an emergency fund for you that couldn't be traced or intercepted. My chest tightened. Where's that money now? That's what's interesting. Ruth Morrison, the neighbor, has been making deposits to a safety deposit box at First National. Same amounts, same timing. I think Eleanor asked her to safeguard cash for you. Another inheritance I didn't know about. How much? Conservatively. Probably another 30 to 40,000, accumulated over the past 6 years. I stared at the bank statements, seeing Eleanor's love translated into careful planning and sacrifice. While my parents had been stealing checks and blocking contact, she'd been finding ways to protect money from me that they couldn't touch. There's more, Patricia continued. Your father's financial records show some interesting patterns too. She pulled out different statements, ones that made my blood run cold. Richard Hartwell made several large purchases shortly after cashing checks made out to you. A boat in 2019, right after the $3,000 unemployment check. Kitchen renovations in 2020, right after the $15,000 emergency fund. He wasn't just stealing your money, Sarah. He was flaunting it. I remembered visiting their house after the kitchen renovation, admiring the new granite counters while struggling to pay for groceries. Dad had joked about finally living the good life, and Mom had mentioned how nice it was to have a little extra money for once. They'd been spending my grandmother's gifts to me while I slept on an air mattress and ate ramen. How much total are we talking about? I asked. Patricia consulted her calculator. 47,000 in documented theft, plus interest and penalties. But if we can prove emotional damages and punitive costs. She looked up at me. Sarah, you could be looking at a settlement well into 6 figures, separate from your inheritance. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, asterisk Sarah, we're hoping to resolve this family matter quickly. The longer it drags out, the more painful it becomes for everyone. Please consider our offer, asterisk. I showed the message to Marcus and Patricia. They're scared, Patricia said. This level of pressure means they know exactly how much evidence exists against them. Marcus nodded. And the timing is suspicious. Settlement offer this morning, pressure text this afternoon. They're trying to create a sense of urgency. I stood up, decision crystallizing. I want them to sweat. How long until we can file everything? Police report this afternoon, probate response by Wednesday, civil suit by Friday, Marcus said. But Sarah, once we start this process, your relationship with your parents is over. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Eleanor's voice on those recordings, growing weaker and more desperate over the years. I thought about the birthday cards I'd never received, the Christmas gifts that had been stolen, the college money that had paid for my parents' luxuries while I worked 3 jobs. Marcus, I said, that relationship ended 26 years ago. I just didn't know it yet. The police station smelled like industrial coffee and broken dreams. Detective Lisa Morrison was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes that had probably seen every variety of human cruelty. She listened without interruption as I played the recordings and spread out the forged checks across her metal desk. 17 recordings spanning 20 years, she said, making notes. 47,000 in documented mail theft and check fraud. Identity theft for redirecting official correspondence. She looked up at me. Ms. Hartwell, this isn't just elder abuse. This is organized fraud spanning multiple decades. I watched her photograph each forged signature, each intercepted piece of mail. What happens now? We open a criminal investigation. I'll need to interview Ruth Morrison, get statements from the banks, subpoena your father's financial records. Detective Morrison paused. Sarah, cases like this, they tend to uncover more victims. Your parents have been running this scheme for 26 years. You might not be the only one they've stolen from. The thought hadn't occurred to me. Other family members. Elderly relatives, deceased estates, insurance settlements. People who run long-term fraud operations like this rarely limit themselves to one target. She closed her notepad. We'll know more once we dig deeper, but my gut says Eleanor wasn't their first victim. I left the police station feeling simultaneously vindicated and sick. The idea that my parents might be serial financial predators was somehow worse than thinking I'd been their only target. My phone rang as I reached my car. Unknown number. Sarah. This is Janet from Marcus Webb's office. You need to get back here immediately. We have a situation. 15 minutes later, I was staring at Marcus across his desk while he held up a legal document that made my stomach drop. Emergency injunction, he said grimly. Filed an hour ago by your father's attorney. They're claiming you've been harassing your parents and making false accusations about Eleanor's mental state. False accusations? My voice cracked. We have recordings. They're arguing the recordings were made without Eleanor's consent by a woman suffering from dementia, and therefore inadmissible. They want all evidence related to Eleanor's mental health sealed pending a psychiatric evaluation. I sank into the chair. Can they do that? They can try. Judge Henderson is reviewing the injunction request now. If he grants it, we won't be able to use Eleanor's recordings or any communications from her final years in court. The room felt like it was spinning. So they could actually win. Marcus leaned forward. Sarah, there's something else. Something that changes everything. He pulled out a manila envelope marked, confidential, attorney eyes only. This morning, after you filed the police report, I received a call from Eleanor's doctor. Dar. Patricia Reeves at Mercy General. She heard about the probate challenge and wanted to provide some information. He opened the envelope and removed what looked like medical records. Eleanor underwent comprehensive neurological testing 8 months ago, when she was updating her will for the final time. Dr. Reeves ordered the test specifically because Eleanor was concerned your parents might claim she was mentally incompetent after her death. My breath caught. She knew they'd try this. She knew exactly what they were capable of. Look at these results. Marcus spread out the test papers. Perfect cognitive function. No signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any mental impairment whatsoever. Dr. Reeves documented that Eleanor was exceptionally lucid and forward-thinking and showed remarkable insight into family dynamics. I stared at the medical records. Eleanor had been 3 steps ahead, even while dying. There's more, Marcus continued. Dr. Reeves also documented something else. Eleanor came to the hospital several times over the past 2 years, not for herself, but inquiring about getting medical records for someone else. Someone else? You, Sarah. Eleanor had been trying to find out if you'd been in any accidents, if you'd needed medical care she didn't know about. She was worried that your parents weren't telling her if you were sick or hurt. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. She thought I might have needed her and didn't know how to reach me. Dr. Reeves said Eleanor cried during one visit because she was terrified you might have been in the hospital alone, without family support, and she'd never know. I closed my eyes, seeing Eleanor in a sterile waiting room, begging strangers for information about a granddaughter who didn't even know she was alive. My phone buzzed. Text from Dad, Sarah, this has gone far enough. Meet us at Denny's on 5th Street at 7 p.m. Come alone. It's time we told you the whole truth, I showed the message to Marcus. His expression darkened. They know about the medical records. Someone tipped them off that their dementia defense just collapsed. Should I go? Not alone. And not without a wire. The wire felt cold against my skin, a thin reminder that my entire family had become evidence in a criminal case. Detective Morrison had insisted on the recording equipment after Dad's text, saying suspects who demanded private meetings were usually planning something desperate. Remember, she said, adjusting the tiny microphone taped under my shirt, don't antagonize them, but don't agree to anything either. Let them talk. Desperate people confess to things they never meant to reveal. Marcus sat in his car across the Denny's parking lot, monitoring the audio feed. Detective Morrison was positioned at a corner booth inside, pretending to read case files over coffee. I felt like I was walking into an ambush disguised as a family dinner. Dad and Mom were already waiting in a back booth, looking older than I'd ever seen them. Mom's hands shook as she stirred her coffee, and Dad had dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Good. Sarah, thank you for coming, Dad said as I slid into the booth across from them. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. We need to clear the air about some misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? I kept my tone neutral, remembering Detective Morrison's coaching. Mom leaned forward, her eyes red-rimmed. Honey, we know you've been talking to lawyers, and we understand why you're confused. But there are things about Eleanor's situation that you don't know. Things we've been trying to protect you from. What things? Dad glanced around the restaurant, then lowered his voice. Eleanor wasn't well, Sarah. Not just physically, mentally. She'd been having episodes for years, becoming obsessed with tracking down family members, making wild accusations. I watched his face carefully. What kind of accusations? She claimed we were stealing from her, intercepting her mail, preventing her from contacting people. Dad shook his head sadly. Classic paranoid delusions. The doctor said it was common in elderly patients with declining cognitive function. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed it myself. If I hadn't heard Eleanor's voice on those recordings, hadn't seen the forged checks, I might have accepted their version of events. The thing is, Mom continued, Eleanor started fixating on you specifically about 5 years ago. She convinced herself she'd been trying to reach you, even imagined sending you money. When we tried to gently correct these delusions, she became hostile. Dad nodded gravely. She accused us of terrible things, Sarah. Said we were keeping her from her granddaughter out of spite. It broke our hearts to see her mind deteriorating like that. I felt sick listening to them rewrite history in real time. So when she called about wanting to see me before she died. That was the dementia talking, Dad said quickly. Sarah, she didn't even remember that you were an adult. In her mind, you were still that 2-year-old she'd lost touch with. It would have been cruel to expose you to that level of confusion. Mom reached across the table, trying to take my hand. We were protecting you, honey. Protecting both of you. Eleanor needed professional care, not false hope about reconciling with family. I pulled my hand away. But she did send me money, didn't she? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Dad and Mom exchanged a look that lasted too long. Sarah, Dad said carefully, Eleanor's financial records from her final years are complicated. She wrote checks to all sorts of people and organizations, most of them non-existent. The bank had to freeze several accounts because of fraudulent transactions. Fraudulent how? Checks made out to people who didn't exist, or to old addresses where no one lived anymore, Mom said. The dementia made her confused about who was real and who wasn't. My pulse quickened. They were dancing around the truth, trying to explain away the evidence without admitting to anything actionable. What happened to those checks? I pressed. Dad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The bank returned them as undeliverable. Sarah, this is exactly why we didn't want you getting involved in Eleanor's estate. It's messy and confusing, and it would only cause you pain to dig through the ravings of a sick woman. But I caught the slip. The bank returned them as undeliverable, not uncashable, not invalid. Undeliverable. Which meant someone had been receiving Eleanor's mail and making decisions about what to do with it. Undeliverable to where? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. Dad's eyes flickered, just for a second, but I caught it. To wherever Eleanor thought she was sending them. Old addresses, places that didn't exist. But someone had to sign for certified mail, right? Someone had to be at those addresses to refuse delivery. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Mom's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. Sarah, why are you interrogating us? Mom's voice cracked. We're your parents. We've spent 26 years protecting you from this mess, and now you're acting like we're criminals. I'm just trying to understand, I said. If Eleanor was sending mail to non-existent addresses, how did anyone know what she was trying to do? Dad leaned back in the booth, and for the first time, I saw something dangerous flash across his face. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking direct questions about my grandmother's mail. Your grandmother was delusional, Dad snapped, his careful composure finally cracking. She spent thousands of dollars on wild fantasies, writing checks to people who hadn't been part of her life for decades. If someone tried to help manage that chaos, it was an act of kindness, not theft. Mom grabbed his arm. Richard, don't. Don't what? He shook her off. Don't tell our daughter the truth. Sarah, yes, we intercepted some of Eleanor's mail. Yes, we prevented those checks from being processed. Do you know why? My heart hammered against the wire taped to my chest. Tell me. Because she was being scammed. Dad's voice rose enough that other diners turned to look. Elderly woman with dementia, writing checks to addresses she found in old phone books. We saved her from losing everything to con artists. By cashing the checks yourselves. The question dropped like a bomb. Dad's face went white, then red. We never, Mom started. We never stole anything, Dad finished, but his voice had lost all conviction. Those checks, they were made out incorrectly, to addresses that didn't exist. The bank suggested we handle them as next of kin. Another lie, but now they were improvising, scrambling to cover tracks they hadn't expected to need to hide. For 26 years. I asked quietly. Dad stood up abruptly, tossing a 20 on the table. This conversation is over. Sarah, you can believe whatever poison those lawyers are filling your head with, but we know what really happened. We were the ones dealing with Eleanor's illness while you lived your life completely unaware she existed. Because you told me she was dead. The words came out before I could stop them. Dad froze halfway out of the booth. We told you she was gone, he said carefully. Which she was. The Eleanor who would have been your grandmother died the day she chose money over family. Mom stood too, gathering her purse with shaking hands. Sarah, we love you. Everything we did was to protect you from being hurt by a sick woman's delusions. If you can't see that, if you'd rather believe strangers and lawyers than your own parents. She didn't finish the threat, but it hung in the air. As they walked toward the exit, Dad turned back one final time. Sarah, think very carefully about what you're doing. Family lawsuits destroy people. They drag everyone's secrets into the light, including yours. Are you sure you want every detail of your life examined in court? After they left, I sat in the booth feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. They'd essentially confessed to intercepting Eleanor's mail and managing her finances without consent, but they'd wrapped it in just enough justification that a sympathetic judge might buy their story. Worse, Dad's final threat felt personal. What secrets did he think I had? Or was he planning to manufacture some? My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, *, got everything. Meet me at the office in 20 minutes. We need to talk about what they just revealed, *. As I walked to my car, I realized something that made my blood run cold. They'd been too prepared, too rehearsed. This entire conversation had been a performance, designed to get me on record accepting their version of events. They weren't just trying to steal my inheritance anymore. They were building a defense for the criminal charges they knew were coming. The audio playback in Marcus's office sounded even more damning than the live conversation had felt. Detective Morrison sat beside me, taking notes as my parents' voices filled the room with their carefully constructed lies. Right there, she said, pausing the recording at Dad's admission about intercepting Eleanor's mail. That's confession to a federal crime. And this part, she rewound to Mom's comment about managing Eleanor's finances. Conspiracy and elder abuse. Marcus looked grim. But they're setting up an incompetency defense. If they can convince a jury that Eleanor was delusional and they were protecting her from scammers, they might escape criminal liability. What about the medical records proving Eleanor was mentally sound? I asked. Those help, but Richard and Linda don't know we have them yet. They think their dementia story is bulletproof. Detective Morrison closed her notepad. Sarah, there's something else. We ran financial forensics on your parents' accounts going back 10 years. She pulled out a thick folder. Your father wasn't lying about one thing, Eleanor did write checks to multiple people and addresses. But here's what's interesting, every single one of those checks was deposited into accounts controlled by Richard Hartwell. My stomach dropped. How many people? At least 6 that we can identify. Cousins, family friends, distant relatives. Eleanor had been trying to reconnect with everyone, and Richard intercepted every attempt. Detective Morrison spread out bank statements. Look at this pattern from 2019 alone. The documents showed a systematic operation. Eleanor had written a $1,500 check to my cousin Jennifer for her wedding, deposited by Dad. A $3,000 check to my great-aunt Martha for medical expenses, cashed by Dad. Birthday money for various family members, Christmas gifts, emergency assistance during the pandemic, all of it stolen and redirected to my parents' accounts. This isn't just about you, Sarah, Marcus said quietly. Your parents have been stealing from your entire extended family for years, using Eleanor's love against her. I thought about family gatherings where relatives would mention feeling hurt that Eleanor never reached out, never acknowledged birthdays or life events. All while she'd been desperately trying to reconnect and my parents had been stealing every gesture of love. How much total are we talking about? Detective Morrison consulted her calculator. Conservative estimate. Approaching $200,000 over the past decade alone. If we go back 20 years, it could be double that. My phone rang. Ruth Morrison, Eleanor's neighbor. Sarah, dear, I'm so sorry to bother you, but something strange happened today. A man came by Eleanor's house claiming to be from the estate lawyer's office. Said he needed to collect some documents before the probate hearing. My blood chilled. What did he look like? Tall, maybe 60 years old, very official seeming. Had a briefcase and everything. But something felt wrong, so I called him away and told him I'd need to verify with the lawyer first. I looked at Marcus, who was already reaching for his phone. Ruth, did this man give you a name? Said he was Robert Hartwell, working on behalf of the family. My father. Using a fake name, probably his father's name, to try to access Eleanor's house. Ruth, don't let anyone into that house without calling Marcus Webb first. And if that man comes back, call the police immediately. After I hung up, Detective Morrison was already on her radio. We need a unit at 1247 Maple Street. Possible breaking and entering in progress. Marcus grabbed his keys. Sarah, your father just escalated this to a whole new level. Breaking into Eleanor's house while the estate is in probate. That's burglary. But why would he risk it? I asked, following them toward the door. Because there's something in that house he's desperate to find, Detective Morrison said. Something that could destroy his entire defense. As we raced across town, I thought about Eleanor's room full of gifts, the letters Ruth had mentioned, the decades of documentation. What had my parents overlooked? What evidence were they so terrified of that Dad would risk felony charges to retrieve it? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, asterisk some secrets are worth protecting at any cost. Think carefully about how far you want to push this, asterisk. I showed it to Detective Morrison, who immediately started making calls about tracing the number. But I already knew who'd sent it. My parents weren't just stealing anymore. They were threatening me. The war was officially on. The police cars were already at Eleanor's house when we arrived, their red and blue lights painting the modest neighborhood in alternating shadows. Detective Morrison's radio crackled as we pulled up, suspect fled on foot. No signs of forced entry, but neighbor reports seeing someone climbing through rear window approximately 30 minutes ago. Ruth met us at the front door, clutching a heavy flashlight like a weapon. I heard glass breaking around back, she said, her voice shaking. By the time I got outside, whoever it was had already gotten inside. I could see a light moving around upstairs. Marcus was already on his phone with the locksmith, but Detective Morrison waved him off. This is a crime scene now. Nobody goes in until we process it. She turned to Ruth. Did you see what the intruder looked like? Tall man, dark jacket. Had a briefcase with him when he went in, but he left it behind when he ran. Ruth pointed to a leather case sitting beside Eleanor's back steps. Dropped it right there when the patrol car came around the corner. Detective Morrison pulled on latex gloves and opened the briefcase. Inside were legal documents, a crowbar, and something that made my blood freeze, copies of Eleanor's house keys. How would your father have gotten these? Morrison asked, holding up the key ring. I stared at them, recognition dawning. Those are Mom's keys. She told me years ago that she still had a set from when Grandpa was alive, in case of emergencies. The betrayal hit me fresh. She's been lying about that too. Said she threw them away when Eleanor died. Marcus examined the legal documents from the briefcase. Emergency probate petition, dated today. Your father was trying to get himself declared temporary administrator of Eleanor's estate, which would give him legal access to the house. But the break-in happened before any judge could rule on that, Detective Morrison noted. Which means he committed burglary while trying to establish legal grounds for being here. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. A uniformed officer emerged from the house. Detective Morrison. You need to see the upstairs bedroom. Looks like someone was searching for something specific. We followed him inside, and Ruth led us to what she called Eleanor's Sarah room. The door hung open, revealing chaos. Boxes had been torn apart, their contents scattered across the floor. Photo albums lay open with pictures missing. A desk had been ransacked, its drawers pulled out and overturned. But what caught my attention was what hadn't been disturbed. The wrapped birthday and Christmas presents still sat neatly on shelves along one wall, decades of gifts Eleanor had prepared for occasions she'd never been allowed to celebrate with me. 26 years of love, waiting patiently for a granddaughter who didn't know she existed. Look at this, Ruth said, kneeling beside the overturned desk. Eleanor kept a special lockbox right here. Small metal thing, maybe 8 inches square. It's gone. Detective Morrison bagged evidence while Marcus documented the scene, but I found myself drawn to a framed photo that had fallen behind the desk. I picked it up carefully, Eleanor and me at maybe 18 months old, sitting on a porch swing. I was laughing at something off camera, and Eleanor was looking at me with such pure adoration that it took my breath away. On the back, in Eleanor's careful handwriting, Sarah and Grandma, summer 1996. My precious girl's first visit to the new house. She loves the swing Robert built. I pray she'll remember this someday. I did remember. Fragments, anyway, the feeling of flying, strong hands keeping me safe, someone singing softly while the swing moved. I'd always thought it was a dream. Ruth saw me studying the photo. That was right before everything went bad with your parents. Eleanor showed me this picture at least once a week for 26 years. Detective Morrison's radio crackled again, suspect in custody. Richard Hartwell, age 64, apprehended 6 blocks from scene. Had bolt cutters and what appears to be a small metal box. They'd caught him. And he'd had Eleanor's lockbox with him. Whatever my father had been desperate enough to commit burglary for, whatever secret he'd been willing to risk everything to keep hidden, we were about to find out. The metal lockbox sat on Detective Morrison's desk like Pandora's box, scratched from Dad's desperate attempt to pry it open during his 6-block flight from Eleanor's house. Marcus had called a locksmith, but I couldn't stop staring at the small dents in the metal, imagining my father's panic as he realized he'd been caught. Your father's not talking, Detective Morrison said, returning from the interrogation room. Invoked his right to counsel the moment we brought him in. But Sarah, this box was important enough for him to commit felony burglary. Whatever's inside could be the smoking gun we need. The locksmith, a patient woman in her 50s, worked methodically while we watched. Old lock, but good quality, she murmured. Someone really wanted to protect whatever's in here. The lock clicked open. Inside were 3 items that made my world tilt on its axis: a thick stack of letters bound with a faded ribbon, a small leather journal, and a legal document I recognized as a birth certificate. But not mine. My hands shook as I lifted out the birth certificate. The name read Robert Michael Hartwell Jr., born March 15, 1962. Parents listed as Robert Michael Hartwell Sr. and Eleanor Margaret Hartwell. I stared at the date. Marcus, this doesn't make sense. This says my dad was born in 1962, but he's always said he was born in 1960. Marcus took the document, studying it carefully. Sarah, look at the hospital listed. St. Mary's Home for Unwed Mothers. The words hit me like ice water. Unwed mothers. Ruth, who had insisted on being present for this moment, went very pale. Oh, my dear girl. I think Eleanor never told you the whole truth about your father. Detective Morrison leaned forward. What kind of truth? Ruth wrung her hands, looking older than her 78 years. Eleanor and Robert, your grandfather, they couldn't have children for the longest time. This was the 1960s, you understand, when people didn't talk about such things. But they tried for years. I felt like the ground was disappearing beneath me. Are you saying Dad was adopted? I'm saying Eleanor was 16 years old when she gave birth to your father. Ruth's voice was barely a whisper. She was just a child herself, unwed, from a very religious family. They sent her away to have the baby, and Robert Hartwell Sr., who was 24 and had been courting her, married her right after and claimed the child as his own. Marcus opened Eleanor's journal, flipping to entries from 1962. Listen to this, brought baby Richard home today. Robert says we'll never speak of the circumstances again, that Richard will grow up believing he was born in wedlock. But I pray someday I can tell him how much I wanted him, even when the world said I shouldn't. The room spun around me. Dad never knew. Eleanor tried to tell him when he turned 18, Ruth continued. She thought he was old enough to understand that being born outside marriage didn't make him less loved. But Richard, he was furious. Called her terrible names, said she'd lied to him his whole life. Detective Morrison picked up the stack of letters. These are addressed to Richard, dated from 1980 to 1998. All unopened. Love letters, Ruth said sadly. Eleanor wrote to your father every year on his birthday, trying to explain, trying to apologize for keeping the secret. She thought if she could make him understand how much she loved him, maybe he'd forgive her. Marcus read from one of the journal entries. Richard says I'm not his real mother, that I'm just the woman who gave birth to him. He won't let me see Sarah because he says children need to be protected from women like me. He's using my own shame against me, the shame I carried for 20 years before Robert helped me heal from it. Everything clicked into place with devastating clarity. The inheritance dispute hadn't been about money, it had been about legitimacy. Dad had spent his entire adult life punishing Eleanor for a secret she'd carried to protect him, using me as the ultimate weapon against a grandmother who'd loved us both unconditionally. The hardware store, I said, understanding flooding through me. Grandpa Robert left it to Eleanor because she was his wife, but Dad felt like he deserved it because he thought he was the biological son. But he was, Ruth said. Robert Sr. adopted Richard legally when he married Eleanor. The boy was his son in every way that mattered. Except Dad never saw it that way, I whispered. He saw himself as the bastard child who'd stolen another man's name. Detective Morrison's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she hung up with a grim smile. That was the DA's office. Richard Hartwell just fired his attorney and wants to make a deal. Apparently, losing this lockbox broke something in him. 2 hours later, I sat in the same conference room where this nightmare had started, but now the power dynamic had completely shifted. Dad looked older, diminished, his hands cuffed to the table as his new public defender whispered urgently in his ear. My client is prepared to make a full confession, the lawyer said, in exchange for consideration on the felony burglary charge. Detective Morrison consulted her notes. Mr. Hartwell, do you understand you're confessing to multiple federal crimes spanning nearly 3 decades? Dad's voice was barely audible. I understand. Let's start with the mail theft. How many pieces of correspondence did you intercept? All of it. Every birthday card, every check, every letter she sent to Sarah or other family members. I had mail forwarding set up from several addresses, told the postal service I was helping elderly relatives manage their affairs. The confession continued for 43 minutes. 26 years of systematic theft, manipulation, and lies, laid out in excruciating detail. By the end, even his public defender looked sick. Why? I finally asked, the question that had been burning in my chest since this all began. Why did you steal my relationship with her? Dad looked at me for the first time since entering the room, and I saw something I'd never seen before, complete defeat. Because she loved you more than she ever loved me, he said simply. Even after everything I did, every cruel thing I said to her, she still spent every day trying to find ways to help you. And I couldn't stand that her bastard granddaughter got the unconditional love that her bastard son never did. The words hung in the air like poison. 26 years of my life had been destroyed because a grown man couldn't handle the fact that his mother's love was big enough for both of us. 6 months later, I sat on the porch swing at 1247, Maple Street, my house now, the house Eleanor had always meant for me to have. Ruth came by most afternoons, bringing stories about my grandmother and helping me sort through decades of love that had been waiting patiently for me to come home. Dad was serving 18 months in federal prison for mail theft and elder abuse. Mom had filed for divorce and moved to Arizona, unable to face the shame of what their marriage had cost. The extended family had rallied around me once the truth came out, everyone sharing their own stories of wondering why Eleanor had stopped reaching out over the years. But the most healing discovery came from Eleanor's journal, in an entry dated just 3 weeks before she died. I know Sarah doesn't know I exist, and maybe that's for the best. Richard was right about one thing, I did make mistakes, kept secrets that hurt people I loved. But if she ever finds out about me, I hope she knows that loving her was the easiest thing I ever did. She was wanted, so deeply wanted, from the moment I knew she existed. I may not have been able to be her grandmother in life, but I've been loving her every single day for 28 years. That has to count for something. It counted for everything. I opened the last unopened birthday gift, the one Eleanor had wrapped for my 29th birthday, the birthday she didn't live to see. Inside was a simple silver locket with a photo of the two of us on that porch swing, and an inscription, Sarah, you were never abandoned. You were always loved. Welcome home, my precious girl. I finally understood what that stranger at the funeral had been trying to tell me. Eleanor never stopped looking for me, never stopped loving me, never stopped believing that someday the truth would set us both free. She was right. It just took 26 years longer than it should have.